Hello, everyone, and welcome to Claims Corner. We have a couple people out today, so I'm filling in for David James, Julie Ward, and for Craig Fowler. My name is Ashley Anderson, the brand manager at CNC, if you didn't know. Today's episode, we have the Knight Solutions team with us. James Thompson, Sales and Marketing Director, Ryan Wilson, Training and Development Director, and Isaac Wilkins, Director of Field Operations, for a pre-recorded video of their presentation, Name That Material, How Shingles Are Made to Withstand the Elements. So we've got a great show for you today. A couple of announcements. Our next Claims Corner is going to be April 13th. That's always at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, so remember that. That's going to have our flood and property team management on that for our presentation of Floated, Flushed, and Blown Away to focus on flood versus sewer damage and flood versus wind damage, so be sure to join us for that on April 13th. A couple more announcements. We want to thank Amy Wilkins for putting together the Pause and Relax event for the Friends of the Mobile Animal Shelter. They had some great pets come this week. We raised just under $300 for them, so thank you everyone that donated for that. And be sure to check out their website for all the adoptable pets that we saw at Pause and Relax this week. And finally, we do have the Habitat for Humanity Volunteer Day coming up on April 15th, so be sure to register with Amy Wilkins by April 10th for that. So we've got a great show for you. We'll have James Thompson at the end to answer questions. Be sure to scroll down below the video on your CNC Pro page to type questions in the comments box for us. So enjoy, and here's that video.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Claims Corner again. Thanks for joining us. Again, we are in our fourth season. Today's discussion is going to be about roofing shingles. How they're made and how they are designed to withstand the elements. We feel like this is a great topic for many reasons. Number one being that 80% of the residential roofs have asphalt shingles on them. Again, I'm David James, the property training manager here at CNC. Here with us today is James Thompson, Ryan Wilson, and Isaac Wilkins from Knight Solutions. James, we'll start with you. We won't hold it up any longer. Won't you tell us, of course, who you are, what you're doing, and we'll get into it.
Yeah, James Thompson, Sales and Marketing Director for Knight Solutions. I'm going into my 7th year as a part of this ladder assist company. Excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Ryan?
Hey, I'm Ryan Wilson. I oversee the training here at Knight Solutions. I've been with the company for about 2 years now.
Okay.
Isaac Wilkins, Director of Operations, 2 years with Knights.
2 years. All right. Good. I can't wait. I've been waiting for this episode, for this topic, to hear what you guys have to say. So one of the things, been doing this for a while, as an adjuster, perspective or looking at things when you go out to a home, one of the things that, one of the questions that come up is, how are these things made? What's the manufacturing process? What is it? What does it look like?
Yeah, for sure. Very relevant question. I think it's important for adjusters to understand how shingles are made. Helps you understand damage to them better.
Mm-hmm.
Helps you understand other anomalies that you see on asphalt composition shingled roofs during an inspection. So shingle manufacturing process from start to finish, starts with a ginormous roll of a fiberglass mat,
Mm-hmm.
right? Probably 6 to 8 foot in diameter. Big machines. Fiberglass mat gets sent through this machine and gets coated with very hot, about 400 degree liquid asphalt bitumen on both sides of this fiberglass mat. That's what makes the fiberglass mat, impermeable, so water can't just readily pass through it, right? So it goes through this machine, coats it with asphalt bitumen, very hot temperature, makes it impermeable. Goes through some more machines. Next one I think would be the blender, is what most of the manufacturers are going to call it. This is where they add the ceramic granules to the top of the shingle itself, right? Asphalt bitumen at this point is still at an elevated temperature, but not at like 400 degrees liquid at this point, right? It's gone through a little bit of a cool down process, and then the ceramic granules added to the top of it. The reason they call it the blender, ceramic granules are kind of dumped on the shingles as they're going through the machine at a very precise timing point trying to achieve a very uniform mixture of color of those granules, right?
Yeah.
A lot of days it's very much about curb appeal when you put the shingles on the roof, right? So add the ceramic granules. Then it goes through some more cooling down phase, goes through some different machines where they start to cut the shingles to the different shapes that they need to be in. 3-tab shingles, right? They get cut in a very specific way. And then architectural shingles get cut in a very different, specific way, trying to cut them so you have as little waste as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you going back to what you said, one of the statements is how in the blender, I think it was, is where you try to mix it and make it uniform or whatever.
Right.
So tell me if I'm out of the lane going with this question. So does that go back to why you want to buy shingles? You want to make sure they come from the same
facility,
lot or facility or
Yes.
whatever. You hear that phrase thrown out there all the time, but you
Yes.
don't really know what.
Absolutely. It's a situation I come across all the time on a roof. Color variations, I refer to them as, when you see it on a roof. Doesn't look like a repair is taking place. It's not like old shingles have been taken out, new ones put in, but you see that slight color variation from this patch of shingles here to the rest of the roof.
Yeah.
99% of the time that's because of incorrect lot numbers.
Mhm.
Same shingle brand, same color, right? Specs, all
Yeah.
that good stuff, right? But this 20 or 30 bundles of shingles came from one facility, and then 5 bundles of shingles came from a different facility.
Mhm.
And then the contractor's just maybe not doing their due diligence, not checking the lot numbers on all the products, right? They put them up there, and then a few years weathering, some fading takes place, and right, you really start to see that color variation on the roof.
And then
that's kind of how you're able to identify prior repairs too,
Mhm.
right? If it's 2 or 3 years later, not only did the shingle on the roof get some age and deterioration and discoloring, maybe fading, what have you, but it's a completely different lot 5 years later, right? Where it's a little bit different shade.
Yeah. Which, again, from an adjuster, from a policy holder, not knowing anything different, we think that's storm damage.
Sometimes. So when you see a color variation, I think the one real key point to hone in on is the condition of the shingle itself, right? So if I see a small patch over here that's just a very slight different shade than the rest of the roof, but it appears to be same age and condition and amount of weathering as the rest of the roof, that definitely, makes me lean towards calling that a color variation.
Right.
Now, if it's just a slight color variation and condition of these shingles right here looks brand new in comparison to the rest of the roof that appears to have 10, 15, 20 years of age, that definitely makes me lean towards saying that looks like a prior repair, right? Because obviously the condition doesn't match the rest of the roof.
Right.
Moisture content also plays a big role in the color. Back when I was in the roofing business, we actually had an install where part of the materials they sent were in a plastic wrap. A few of the bundles were plastic wrap. The others were wrapped in cardboard paper.
Yeah.
So the cardboard paper shingles were much drier at the time of install. And we were freaking out because we thought we were either going to have to pay for the re-roof ourselves or go through some sort of warranty deal, and it was just going to be a pain.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, they told us, they said, give it time to dry out. Right.
Yeah.
And it was the plastic wrap shingles that were still holding a lot of moisture.
Tons of condensation
that
up
dried
in the
out, and then everything blended well.
Yeah. That's an interesting note.
That is. I was just about to say that. Which kind of leads into the next question. Shingles how do they withstand the elements, the weathering, of that?
I mean, it's definitely the ceramic granules that get put on shingles, that and asphalt bitumen.
Yeah.
The manufacturing process, that's definitely what helps them hold up against weathering. Fiberglass reinforcement base mat. Now, shingles used to be made from paper products. We've all experienced some organic shingles out in the field before.
Yeah.
If you've ever seen them on a roof, you know what I'm talking about. The ones that they curl a whole lot, the net shrinkage because of the paper reinforcement mat rather than fiberglass, just doesn't hold up to the elements as well. It was a very good thought in the beginning, right? And the thought was these are decomposable, right? They break down when they finally make their way to a landfill after a lifespan, right? They decompose, blah blah blah. Yeah. But as far as actually being on a roof and holding up to the weather, for the first few years, dozen years, maybe even 10, 15 years, they do okay. But
Yeah.
past that point, it's not a pretty picture.
It looks terrible on the
Yeah,
roof.
it does.
Over time. Looks terrible.
Blisters are one thing that, from imperfections in the manufacturing process, whether it's, I forget the key word, but particles, they use a lot of recycled product, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's old tires or whatnot to create new asphalt, right?
Asphalt bitumen.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that can be a thing.
But those imperfections can be part of the cause for things that show imperfections in the shingle, whether immediately or 2-3 years later, that can sometimes or oftentimes look like hail damage.
Sometimes get misconstrued as hail damage. I'm not going to say personally that they look like hail damage. I mean, obviously we're trained to know the difference and differentiate between them. But blistering, kind of starts as part of the manufacturing process. For me, my understanding of it is slightly different. Yeah, some shingles do get manufactured from recycled materials, but blistering for the most part, I think, comes from leftover hydrocarbons from the crude oil refinement process, right? Which is where asphalt bitumen comes from, crude oil refinement. So some of the hydrocarbons are not refined out of this crude oil, right? And then that asphalt bitumen gets used in the production of asphalt composition shingles. It really just becomes a temperature thing, right? Once a shingle is produced, shipped, put on a roof, heats up in the summer, gets to a certain point, little bitty hydrocarbons left over in that bitumen go pop, 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 little tiny micro explosions that kick granules up off the shingle and leave behind these blisters that we're very accustomed to seeing day in and day out.
Yeah, that was gonna keep answering the questions before I get to ask them.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
Beat you to it.
Talking about thermal expansion and contraction. That's the reason. A big reason why they made the switch from an organic mesh to the fiberglass mesh is because during the day, as your roof heats up and cools down in the evening, a fiberglass mesh will allow that shingle to expand and contrast better than the organic mesh that we, used to use back in the day.
Right.
Yeah. That was going to be one of the things you see, the little cracking, across the shingles.
Yeah. Thermal cracking.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, what he's talking about there, thermal expansion and contraction, that definitely plays right back into the initial question of how do shingles withstand weathering and the elements and all that good stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the shingles themselves, right? Understand that shingles are just one material that comprise an entire roofing system, right? So it's kind of unfair to put all of the weight on shingles themselves, saying how are they produced and how do they withstand weather and elements. It's really a multifaceted answer. Ventilation on a roofing system is absolutely critical.
Right.
Critical. In order a 30-year shingle, in order for it to actually last 30 years, ventilation is critical.
Right. And ventilation can stem from, obviously the vents on the roof, but the soffit being vented, all sorts of different factors that come into play. Yeah, absolutely. We'll see that a lot. You just hear, the attic heats up and then it just pops the shingles or whatever, but it's also got to be ventilated as well. Next question. So what is special about a Class 4 impact resistant shingle?
Okay, so let me break that down a little bit further.
All right.
You're probably familiar with designer shingles, right? Mm-hmm. And different cuts, different layouts for different types of shingles. Every shingle is going to fit into a classification of usually between 1 and 4. Okay. And that's a measurement of impact resistance to that shingle. How they measure that, Class 1 starts at, they take a steel ball that's 1.25 inches big, and they'll drop it from 12 feet. And that will pass Class 1. It goes all the way up to Class 4, which is going to be a 2-inch steel ball, which is going to equate to about golf ball size hail.
Yeah.
They'll drop it from 20 feet. And that's enough force at that height to actually crack a 4-inch concrete paver.
Wow.
So Class 4, that's a pretty serious impact resistant shingle.
Yeah.
Most of the time, you're going to find that shingles are going to fit into the Class 1 and Class 2 around the United States. As you get into Class 3 and Class 4, that's what you would kind of define as impact resistant.
Yeah.
Let's look at a picture of maybe a designer shingle we may have.
Okay.
There's some good old T-locks.
Yeah, so there's a T-lock shingle there, but the thickness would be a little bit higher.
Yeah.
depending on the shingle manufacturer.
So I've got a
And-
question. So
yeah.
on the higher impact resistant shingles, based on you guys' experience, do you see those more in places like Colorado, states that are prone, Minnesota
Texas.
to Texas to
I think so.
hailstorms?
I think
Yes.
so. Absolutely.
So contractors will, depending on the area that you live and the weather that you get, they may recommend, hey, you probably need a class 3 shingle, based on how many hailstorms and the, size of hail
Right.
that you get in this area. So,
Right.
yeah,
Are they produced any different than the regular shingle?
they are. So to fit usually into the class 3, make it into the class 3, class 4, shingle manufacturers usually use 2 standard manufacturing practices. The first one being they will use a polymer type mesh as a backing underneath the shingle. So, you have the fiberglass mat in the middle coated
Right.
in the asphalt. They will then add a second mat underneath it as well to the back of that shingle.
Yeah.
And that gives it, pretty high impact resistance.
Additional
This-
reinforcement.
Yes. The second way is they will use a rubber type solution, a SBS rubber mixed in with the asphalt.
Mhm.
So your asphalt material will have a rubber type feel. So when that shingle is impacted, it will kind of bounce back
A little more,
and
more
reform.
flexibility.
and it
Yeah.
will also hold those granules better.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. I remember working years ago at a hailstorm in Texas and talked to a policyholder before we got out there, and they had personal property damage to the inside of their home. And I was kind of like, okay, but you had hail damage.
Stemming from hail damage. Yep.
Yeah. I'm like, how did that? So when I got there, it was almost the size of a softball. It had
Softball.
punctured through
Straight through the roof.
through the roof.
Yeah, man. Texas
Yeah.
and Colorado, they get that kind of. I'm from Texas. Me and Wilson both from Texas. In our geographic area, right? We don't get that kind of stuff like
Right.
Texas, Colorado. Like I've never seen softball size hail in my entire life, let alone the 7 years I've been doing this with Knight Solutions.
Yeah.
Biggest I've ever seen is about golf ball,
Yeah.
maybe just bigger than golf ball size.
Mhm.
Most substantial hail hit I've ever seen. Clean puncture or fracture break through 28 gauge steel
Yeah.
metal panel on a roof. I actually seen a clean break through that from a hailstone. That's a little bit bigger than a golf ball,
Mhm.
or at least that's what my evidence told me that day.
Right.
Spatter marks, other damage, collateral evidence I was looking at, a little bit bigger than a golf ball. It's up 2 inches or so, 2.25,
Mhm.
somewhere in that range.
Wow.
But not softball. I mean, softballs,
Yeah, that's crazy.
I'd be blown away to see a softball size hole like clean through a shingled roof. That
Yeah.
would be a whole new
Yeah,
experience.
it was different.
it is important though for an adjuster to know when they're identifying a product to use for a roofing system, if they can figure out that classification,
Mhm.
and they can match, a storm date and potential hail
Mhm.
sizes that come from that storm date.
Yeah.
Hey, we have this type classification on this roof. It was bigger. The hail that came through here reported was bigger than what they used on this roofing system.
Right.
So
Right.
that could be
Right.
very valuable to an adjuster to know.
Absolutely, especially with the
Sure.
way you explained how they're tested.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of segues into ridge cap shingles.
Right.
Is that where you were going next?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got your primary standard slope shingles. All right. What's on the actual field of the slope is either a 3-tab or an architectural, primarily. Occasionally, you can have those class 3 and 4
Designer shingles.
designer,
Lifetime.
high end, more expensive products, right?
Yeah.
But you also have hip and ridge cap shingles to match that. So real quick, in case there's any confusion on what a hip and ridge cap is, the ridge cap is obviously the apex, top of the roof. The hip is the inclined ridge cap. May lead from a corner to a ridge or meet other hips at the top of the roof.
Mhm.
And where those courses of shingles meet at those points, it's like the hat, right? For zipping up those two slopes together.
Joints, right?
So, the common practice, especially on 3-tab roofs, is 3-tab shingles. You don't have to buy, as an installer, you don't have to buy a separate type of ridge cap. You just buy an
Mhm.
extra square, 2 square And it gets factored into the waste percentage, but
Should. Yeah.
the installers will cut them on site, and the manufacturer has to do nothing different to those 3-tab shingles. The color matches. The only difference is they just cut them, and they cut little angles on. We may have a photo. No, we don't have a photo right now of that, but we do have some photos of hip and ridge cap. But the 3 tabs get cut. And so identifying that on the roof, what it does as an inspector or adjuster is you can tell if you have a difference in what looks like damage to your main slope and either the absence of that same damage on the ridge cap or hip, or consistency between those to try to build the case that you're reporting on. So you've got the 3-tab shingles, and then you go to the hip and ridge, which is the next step up. Those are usually 30-year shingles. And then from there you have the high impact, or is it impact resistant ridge caps. We've got a couple photos of that. Initially, and they may still do it in some places, but installers would install like a double layered 3-tab for a beefier ridge cap. And then manufacturers kind of caught on with that as well and started creating a thicker 30-year plus hip and ridge. The key difference in those is they're perforated, so you don't have to cut them on site. It makes for a little bit faster install. From the factory, they perforate them. You just bend and it breaks. Right. And then the other manufacturing difference in those is they already have a little bit of a crown to them, so they were better form fitted to be a ridge cap shingle
rather than the hand cut 3 tabs that have to be kind of folded and molded around the hips and ridges.
Right. So the manufacturing process isn't much different, other than a little bit of after completion. They either perforate them and or shape them a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. Did you say this already on a let's say on a laminate roof? If it's not a high profile, standard profile ridge or hip, is that a different shingle? Did you say that already? Did you cover that? If not, you know what I mean?
And not exactly. I mean, we know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, I've seen architectural shingled roofs that have standard profile ridge caps and some that have high profile. It's really just a preference of the contractor that's putting the roof on, or more likely it's preference of the homeowner, right?
And budget.
Right. Budget. Right.
I mean, the biggest thing from an inspection standpoint is if you have a 30-year roof with a 25-year ridge cap, you would, if you think you have damage on the shingle, you should darn sure have it on the ridge cap.
We were talking about this earlier, right? It's circumstantial, depending on the way some houses are built, how the builders do it, how their sheets of OSB come together at the ridges or at the hips. But generally speaking, from an inspector's standpoint, in a hail damage claim, right, we're definitely looking at those ridge caps. We're definitely looking at those hips to try to see if there's evidence of damage there before we even get into the open field shingles. And there's pretty good reason why. Again, circumstantial depending on how the roof was built, but hips and ridges, the caps themselves are not always, or most of the time, not as well supported as shingles in the open field. Shingles in the open field are laying directly against OSB sheathing, backing, right? Great example you gave us earlier, right? Like about a sheet of paper.
Okay. Yeah. Think about taking a sheet of paper and holding it out in front of your face, right?
Yeah.
If you were to punch that piece of paper, you're going to go straight through it, right?
You just poke a hole right through it.
But if you put that piece of paper up against a wall and punch it, you're not going to damage it. And that's the difference between seeing damage, the density of damage that you can see on a rip or a hip or ridge versus the actual shingle on the roofing system.
In the field.
That shingle is going to be laying against decking, right? So it has something to brace it versus that hip or ridge shingle doesn't. It may, in areas on the edge be elevated.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, circumstantial about how the house was built. Some of them are more well supported than others. Sometimes you'll have some small voids along hips, along ridges, right? And if it's unsupported and there's nothing solid right behind it, right, when a hailstone impacts it, much more likely to actually cause damage to that ridge cap or to the hip cap, right? So that's definitely evidence we're looking at from an inspector standpoint to correlate, to try to substantiate calling hail damage to shingles in the open field,
Right.
because those are going to be the most well-supported areas of the entire roofing system, right? And for a hailstone to strike one of those shingles in the open field that is very well supported, again, go back to that image of a piece of paper being held up against the wall, right? For it to actually create damage to that piece of paper. In this case, we're talking about shingles,
Right.
Has to be really substantial, has to be very high level of kinetic energy from that hailstone to actually create damage.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's a great analogy. Great stuff. From a inspector perspective, what are the most common types of shingles you see out there, and the differences?
I know the answer to this one.
What you got?
3-tab and architectural shingles.
For sure.
Anyone want to try to? You're going to give me the ding? Did I get it right?
Ding,
This
ding,
is
ding.
Adam's show? No, okay.
I left that.
But yeah,
button in
y'all
my
agree,
office.
right?
Yeah,
Architectural
it's,
laminate and 3-tab.
In the field, most of the time you're going to see a dimensional or a 3-tab shingle. Yeah. One of the biggest differences is going to be wind rating, right? Generally speaking, your laminate or dimensional is going to have a higher wind rating than a 3-tab shingle.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it would take much more significant wind, basically, on
Yeah.
a laminate shingle to acquire damage. They're a little bit more pricey. They're thicker. So
Yeah, break down the key differences there. So, 3-tab shingles, just, single ply, right? Not multiple layers of shingle on top of one another, which is what an architectural shingle is, sometimes referred to as laminate shingles, right?
Yeah.
So earlier when we were talking about the actual shingle manufacturing process, after they get coated in asphalt bitumen, they get ceramic granules put on top of them, right? Go through a cool down phase, and then they go through the cutting machine. So architectural shingles, right? They get cut in such a manner that one part of the shingle, after it gets cut, gets flipped around, they kind of get sandwiched together, get sealed together, laminated together, so to speak, right?
Right.
So when you have an architectural shingle out in the field, it's not just single ply. There's actually multiple layers to the shingle.
Can we get that on screen?
Makes it thicker, makes it a little bit tougher. Obviously, increases the wind rating. Also increases the aesthetic value also for the homeowners, right?
Yeah.
So the visual you have here on the left side, you got your standard 3-tab shingles, just single ply. On the right side, you've got architectural shingles, right? Give you that. So a lot of times also referred to as 3-dimensional shingles, right? When you're on the ground looking up at the roof of a house, right, it gives you that 3-dimensional look rather than just solid single plane.
Yep. And you can see how the blender in the manufacturing process, there's a lot more sophistication when they take into account putting those keys. You can see on the right, there's multiple different elements there. So that curb appeal from the road is going to be a lot higher.
do you guys see this as the norm in Texas as well, in your home state?
Yeah.
I believe I misspoke earlier. So I'm not actually from Texas. I'm from Kentucky. What I was saying earlier, we were talking about hail. I was like, we don't see that in my area of the country. Obviously, Texas, that's where they get lots of major hail. I was trying to say not from Texas, not that I am from Texas. I think I misspoke. So appreciate you bringing
That's
that
all right.
up.
Nothing wrong with being from Texas.
Letting me correct
No, don't mess with Texas.
You hear a lot of-
Can we go back to that photo real quick? I want to point something out that Ron brought up as far as you mentioned key. The keys.
Yes.
What exactly is that?
So like James was saying, they will, in the manufacturing process, they cut that shingle into 2 parts, right? And they will take those 2 parts and overlap them. And when they do, it creates what I refer to as keys on the shingle. So you can see it rises and lowers. There's tabs. Some people refer it to as laying there on the shingle.
Teeth. Some people call them
there's
dragon's
multiple
teeth.
different terms for it.
Right.
That's your question.
That's the top layer
Yep.
of the architectural shingle, right? I refer to the bottom portion as a base mat, and then the top portion, I call it a laminate portion. But the shapes, right? And different shapes for different shingles, but some people call them dragon's teeth. I call it the laminate portion, top portion of the shingle. Different reference points you can use there. But basically just talking about the multiple layers of a architectural shingle.
Yeah, that's thrown out there a lot. So I wanted to, thanks for the clarification on that.
It's a lot of times you'll see damage out in the field, maybe not to the full shingle itself, right? But you'll see wind damage on an architectural shingle where it's just that for me, I, again, called it laminate portion.
Mhm.
Just the laminate portion of the shingle where the keys or the tabs or whatever you want to refer to them as, just that portion has become unsealed and has been, flipped over into a damaged position by the
Right.
wind.
Right.
And you can argue this both ways, right? Does that technically constitute wind damage, right? Has it affected the water shedding capabilities of that roofing system at all? Probably not. But aesthetically, I mean, obviously you see it.
Right.
Is it damage of any sort to the shingle at all? Yes, absolutely it is. It's still wind damage to that shingle. Just because the shingle has not become completely unsealed or
Right.
completely removed from the roofing system, still
Right.
wind damage to that shingle.
Well, there's
Right.
there's another thing with the manufacturer of shingles we haven't talked about, which is also the nail zone,
Mhm.
right? Your nail zone is usually what, an inch and a quarter, inch and a half
I think so.
area. Some manufacturers install it's kind of like a synthetic felt, but a fabric
Reinforcement. Yeah.
along that nail zone. But the key point there is manufacturer specifications give a certain quantity of nails per shingle. And if you don't realize the whole installation process,
Mhm.
you'll be kind of blown away as to why it says 8 nails. You're like, you've got a 3-foot zone and they want 8 nails in there. That seems like overkill. Or if it's 10 nails or 12 nails, what have you.
Yeah.
The other half of those nails come from the top portion of the shingle, right?
The
From the
overlap.
underlay.
Mm.
Yep.
Overlap of a shingle, right?
So when installed properly, you've got, to acquire that wind ratings to give, whether they say it's 75 miles an hour or 110, you've got to have that nail count closely appropriate, at least, to achieve the wind rating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So-
touching on those keys being flipped up, do consider that, wind damage, because that would take away from the impact resistance
Mhm.
of that shingle and, decrease the wind rating for that shingle as well. I see some adjusters out in the field sometimes where that's just purely aesthetic. No, it does impact the functionality of that shingle, even though it is just a small tab or a small key that is flipped up.
Right.
And
Right.
definitely affects the longevity
Yeah,
of the shingle
absolutely.
in general.
Right.
I want to touch on his point about the nails real quick, just to give a quick illustration, right? How shingles are installed on the roof, one course and then the next course above it, and then the next course above it. So what he's talking about when you say 8 nails per shingle, right? So if you start at the eave of a house down at the lower edge,
By the gutter.
right, 1, 2, 3, 4 nails in a single shingle, right? And then
Mhm.
the next shingle that you put on top of it, right? When you nail this shingle, the 4 nails that you put in this are catching the top edge of that course below it. So
Right.
it has 4 nails here, but I'm illustrating this wrong. Let's say this is the top edge of the shingle. The shingle extends all the way down here. This is the exposure. This is the parts you actually see. Right. Here's your nail zone. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then when I lay the next shingle on top of it, right, this is where the exposure of the next shingle goes.
Mhm.
It overlaps a good portion of that first shingle that you put on, right?
Wilson,
So
you
then-
want to give him a hand? I think he needs some extra hands for shingles.
So then when you hit the nail zone of that next shingle up, it's catching the top edge of the first shingle that you laid. So it's got 4 nails here and 4 nails there. That's what completes the good installation practice of shingles.
Right.
That's what gives it its overall wind resistance. And down at the eave, it even goes further, right? You have your starter courses as well,
Mhm.
right? They're nailed onto the roof first, and they have additional cohesive sealant out at the very edge of it, right? So the very edge of the roof, your exposure of a shingle where you don't have nails actually in it,
Yeah.
it's adhered to that starter strip below it
Mhm.
to again achieve multiple plies. Makes it a little bit more stiff. Definitely makes it a lot more wind resistant at the eaves.
Yeah.
of the roofing system.
Which is the final product, I guess, that we haven't really talked about at all, was the starter shingles. You've got the factory made starter shingles that have an adhesive strip
Yes.
near the bottom edge, just like you would see on the upper courses of shingles.
Right.
Whereas 3 tabs can also be turned around a lot. Commonplace to find eave shingles that you can lift up because they're not sealed, because that sealing strip on a
Right.
turned around 3 tab is still in the same place. It's in the middle of that shingle.
Yeah.
So when you do that,
an actual starter shingle, a real starter shingle will have much more substantial
Yeah.
cohesive seal than just a 3 tab that's flipped upside
Right.
down
Yeah.
and used as a starter.
unlike a starter or unlike a 3 tab shingle, a starter shingle can't be used for any other purpose then
Than
as a
just being
starter.
a starter.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's important to know, those specifications from the manufacturer as far as the nail count goes for each shingle, using a starter shingle for each roofing system to meet those specifications for wind rating and impact resistance.
Yeah, warranties kind of come into effect there, right? Some manufacturers, they'll say, or maybe just a supplier, if you buy these 3 products, we'll guarantee this warranty or guarantee this kind of discount. There's certain kind of perks that you can get to having those things, but functionally, best product and best practice would be to use design products for their purpose, right?
Yep.
Starter shingle, hip shingle.
Yeah.
Caps that are actually intended to be used as caps rather than hand cut 3 tabs.
Right.
All that comes into play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely. Glad you touched on the warranty. That is going to be a question of mine, but I think you answered that fully. So
Good deal.
yeah, incredibly important to note that, shingles themselves, again, only one material of an overall roofing system, right? In order for it to be put together well, back to the main topic of our discussion here today, how do they withstand the weather, the elements, right? Understand that shingles are just one part of an overall roofing system, right? Everything else definitely comes into play too. The starter strip, making sure they're very wind resistant right at the eaves, using the proper hip and ridge caps, right, to protect those vulnerable areas. Those are generally where you're going to see wind damage on a roofing system first because of the way wind air has to flow over and around the structure.
They're called the high wind zones.
Yes, like open fields. That's actually where you would generally see wind damage least or the last, right?
Around the
Generally
hips.
see it around hips, ridges,
Valleys.
eaves first. That's where the negative air pressure is going to be the greatest as the storm's coming through and as air's flowing around and over a structure.
Yeah.
So incredibly important to use, again, intended materials for their intended purposes in order to achieve a fully functioning roofing system that will stand up to the elements, weathering, ventilation. Again, we talked about that earlier. It's critical.
Yeah.
Like all these things come together as one to make a very efficient roofing system.
Another thing that also causes those high wind zones to be high wind zones is also that vapor barrier, that synthetic or felt underlayment, right? Installers can oftentimes, I don't want to say be lazy, but maybe not go completely to the eave, right?
I see that all the
Or
time.
go all the way to the ridge or over the ridge.
Right.
So you have areas at times where the decking of the roof is in direct contact with the shingle, right? So the moisture content of the shingle can be a little bit different, causing that expansion and contraction to be different. Therefore,
Or
unsealing
flexibility.
those sealed shingles, making them more susceptible to wind
Yeah.
damage.
That's a great point. I see that all the time, right? Right as I set my ladder up and getting ready to actually access the roof. And, we lift the shingles up at the eave just a bit, try to identify the materials, right? Is there drip edge or is it gutter apron? Is it synthetic felt versus just your regular asphalt saturated felt? And you don't see anything right there at the eave, right? You see drip edge, but you don't see any felt. I see some exposed wood, some sheathing. I'm like, all right, it looks like this house doesn't have felt. Well, then you get up on the roof and you find some wind damage, right? You find an area where a couple of shingles are missing, and then you can clearly see felt covering the OSB sheathing. And I'm like, dang it. Like, I can see it here. I know it's on the roof, but why can't I see it at the eave? Why doesn't it extend all the way down and cover all of the exposed
And
OSB
I'll
sheathing?
tell you the main reason is the installers don't want any excess hanging out beyond the eave where it's visible from the ground under the shingle. So nor do they want to come back and have to cut it off
I
for
was gonna
time's sake.
say that.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't. But it still doesn't make sense from a water shedding perspective. When you're installing the felt, you definitely start down at the eave, right? Your first course is at the eave, just like the shingles themselves, right? Just like the top layer, the finished roofing material. You start at the eave and you work your way up slope. Why? Because every time you lay a course of shingles or felt in this case, right, the next course above it has to overlap it, right, by a certain inch or foot or whatever it is, right, because water sheds down the slope.
Right.
So they're always starting at the eave. So why don't they start the felt all the way down at the edge of the eave of the OSB sheathing? It just doesn't make sense. I don't get it. I don't get it, but I see it all the time. It just annoys me.
I don't know. Maybe we can go out in the field and have you do a video.
That sounds like a good time, David.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Great information. Great information. So
I think we're about ready to wrap it up here.
yeah,
you got anything
I
else for
was
us?
no, I just absorbing all this information you guys have thrown out there. I think it's been a great discussion. I know I've got some takeaways. Hopefully, our audience has some takeaways. I just want to thank you guys for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for
Isaac
having us.
Wilkins, not Wilson. Isaac Wilkins,
Yes.
Ryan Wilson,
Yes.
James Thompson.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us.
Night Solutions.
Appreciate you guys coming all the way from Texas. That was, I'm sure that was a big trip for y'all. So,
Yeah,
thanks for
I
having
was going to
us.
say not from Texas, but
Yeah.
thank you for pointing that
And
out.
hey, let's go ahead and open it up for some questions.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Q&A time.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks, everyone who was able to join us for that pre-recorded episode. We'll now open it up for some questions from James Thompson. James, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for having me today.
Perfect. Well, everyone, if you've held your questions to the end, go ahead and put them down in CNC Pro in the comments section. We'll get started with a couple that we have already. So the first thing I'll ask is, we see this happen sometimes. How often do you inspect houses that have like a double layer of shingle? And how does that affect the integrity of the roof over time when they have a double layer of that asphalt shingle?
Yeah, I see that pretty commonly. It's cutting corners a little bit, right, rather than tearing off a damaged layer of shingles. Sometimes contractors or individuals, insureds themselves, think it's best to just install a new layer over the top of it. Not not the best practice. Those asphalt composition shingles, a lot of people just overlook this fact. They're extremely heavy. Lots of extra weight that you're putting on that roofing system, the rafters. It's just not good for longevity. It's also not good for thermal properties, right? You'll see a lot of problems with double, triple layered roofs when it comes to blistering, thermal cracking, improper ventilation, trapped moisture, elevated moisture levels in attic spaces, stuff like that. Fasteners, the nails themselves, right? That can become a real issue as well. The coils of nails in your pneumatic roofing nail guns, designed to take specific types of nails, length of nails. Sometimes if you're trying to shoot through 2 or 3 layers of shingles, you're not actually fastening that shingle to the decking appropriately. That can cause some real issues as well. So always best to stick with single layer of main roofing material. That's always best practice.
Well, and I guess related to just installation, are there any kinds of methods of installation that you see cause problems? Things that in the long run wind up causing damage over time because of incorrectly having those shingles installed?
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of different types of installation methods or practices. One of the most common problems that we see as far as installation is something we refer to as racking. That's when the installers, rather than working kind of left to right on a slope, this is very prominent on steep pitch slopes, 9, 12, 10, 12, 11, 12, anything upwards. Because of the pitch, very difficult to access, stay on their roofing system while you're installing. So contractors will use toe boards or special types of equipment to work up and down the slopes rather than left to right. And so racking, what that refers to is pretty much a seam straight up a slope, where you see, just alternating pattern of the end of the shingle here, end of the shingle there, back and forth, straight line all the way up and down the slope. Again, it really causes problems with thermal expansion and contraction. That roofing system is pretty much considered a living, breathing thing. That's why ventilation is so important also. Always constantly expanding ever so slightly when it heats up in the day and contracting at night when it cools down, expanding and contracting. So when you do that racking installation pattern, you can end up with lots and lots of unsealed corners of
Mm-hmm.
the shingle. The cohesive seal is not doing its job appropriately with that installation pattern. That can cause problems. Zippering is, as it's commonly referred to, is also a big issue when it comes to installation. So if the ends of the shingles are not properly staggered, right? If it's just here's a break, there's the next break, one course up, next break. Wind, whenever you do have a major wind event and it comes through there, it'll zipper all the way up that line. It'll unseal the corners of those shingles. Um, overall, just installation patterns like that, they can lead to more damage. They can lead to unsealed shingles all over the place, simply due to thermal expansion and contraction. It's not always wind that's actually causing those shingles to come unsealed, right? It's a naturally occurring phenomenon, but it stems from the way the shingles are installed on that roofing system.
Thanks for answering that, James. And we've got a couple more in the chat, so let me pull those. From Kelsey Burford, our property claims manager. What shingle, in your personal opinion, is the best, longest lasting in a humid climate, and then on such as areas like the Southeast?
The most prominent, probably the best product out there. I'm not going to name a specific manufacturer,
That's fair.
but a 30-year laminate shingle is probably about the best bang for your buck.
Gotcha.
Definitely going to have much higher wind ratings than your traditional 3-tab shingles. They're also a lot better at holding up against hail impacts. Again, bang for your buck. Now you can go with 40-year laminate shingles. There's probably 50-year laminate shingles still on the market. You can go with designer laminate shingles. They all come at a very premium price, right? And it's the benefits from premium designer grade shingles is more aesthetic than it is anything else. Laminate shingles, 30-year laminate shingles that you buy at Home Depot, Lowe's, any supply warehouse, they're going to hold up just about as well as those designer shingles. Now there are some fancier stuff like hail impact resistant shingles. Again, they come at a premium cost. And is it really going to extend the life of that roofing system? That's debatable. They have lifetime shingles out there on the market as well, but I'm here to tell you that it's not going to last an entire lifetime. 50, 60, 70 years. Asphalt composition shingles are just not designed to really last that long. 30-year laminate shingle, if it's installed correctly and the roof is properly ventilated, can last you up to 30 years, definitely, barring major weather events, natural disasters, things of that nature. So I think 30-year laminate's best bang for the dollar.
All right. Sounds like some great arguments there. Another thing from Michelle in our CNC Pro comment box, what are some of the line items that roofing contractors are getting added to a roof claim that adjusters would benefit from knowing about and adding to their original estimates?
Well, this is a little bit outside of my expertise. We're a lidar assist company. We perform inspections, but we don't do any policy interpretation, any estimate writing.
Of course.
I've spoken with contractors and had many discussions with adjusters. The light items on an estimate can be extremely extensive. I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but sometimes redecking definitely comes into play. A nailable surface, right? But during an inspection, a typical inspection for us, right? Like we're doing an inspection while the roof is still on there, so we don't see that. So best advice I can really give is that for contracting side of it as well, any type of supplements they may be asking an adjuster to take note of and address. Photo documentation, everything it revolves around documentation. Get photos of it. Once you do a tear off, right, and you're left with the exposed decking, document everything to a T, right? Make sure you have the photos to back it up. If you're going to argue for drip edge or for ice and water shield, or if you're going to try to debate about ice and water shield in valleys, depending on your location in the country. Some areas, obviously further north, require it by building code, and then southern states and warmer climates do not require it. So all of these things come into play. Document everything very, very well. That's the best advice I can give.
Appreciate that, James. I know it's not really in a ladder assist company's purview, but thanks for answering that to the best of your ability there.
Absolutely.
Another question from the property team. How does placing the nails in the wrong place affect the shingles and their longevity?
Yeah, absolutely. The manufacturer specifications are extremely important. They're there for a reason. High nailing, overdriven nails. Those are probably the two most common problems that we come across and see during our inspections. It's very important to understand why high nailing is a problem. Some people look at it and they're like, oh, the nail's in the shingle, it's doing its job, right? It's not an issue. Thing is the way that shingles get installed, one course over top of another, overlapping all the way up a slope. So when you put a nail through a shingle in the appropriate placement, it should actually be also nailing through the shingle of the course below. So you think about each individual course of shingles should actually have two rows of fastener through it into the decking, securing it in place. But when you high nail, whenever the installers are not taking time and patience to do things correctly, getting in a little bit of a hurry, those pneumatic nail guns, working very very
Mm-hmm.
fast. If they're shooting high, that means that nail is not catching the course of shingles below it. Um, and all of these can affect the wind ratings of those shingles, right? The wind ratings of these shingles are only effective if the installation is done correctly, right? I tell people this all the time during inspections. They ask about, oh, a shingles ripped off this roof. I'm thinking about going with metal. What do you think? Get that question every day. Well, the material you put on your roof is only half the battle. It's only half of the battle. The other half of the battle is installing it correctly, because if it's not installed correctly, doesn't matter what the material is, going to have problems out of it.
Yeah, and I mean, just to segue into the next question here in the chat related to installation, can there be too much ventilation when you're installing those shingles? And if so, what problems can that cause, or if any?
That's an interesting question. Not sure I've ever come across that issue, not one time. I don't think you can have too much ventilation on a
Mm-hmm.
roof. It really kind of boils down to an issue of how much real estate do you have on that roofing system to install ventilation. So some roof designs obviously don't allow enough real estate for placement of box vents or power vents. And in a lot of those situations, that's why the contractors, the installers, would go with ridge vent in that scenario, and that would be effective, right? I've never seen a roof with too much ventilation.
Okay.
I've only seen it the other way around with not enough ventilation. Another thing really important to understand about ventilation is not just on the roof itself. It's not just the box vents or power vents or ridge vent or whatever type of ventilation choose to use for your roofing system, but it's also the soffit, the eave overhangs of the roofing system. If they don't have inlets, air intake vents for the air to be able to flow through the attic space appropriately and then vent out through the box vents or power vent on the roof, that can be a very big issue as well. So I've never seen too much
Mm-hmm.
ventilation. I've seen adequate ventilation, but not enough inlets on the eave overhangs, right, to allow proper airflow. And I've seen roofing systems with absolutely no ventilation at all, and that's obviously a bad thing. Leads to accelerated agent deterioration, blistering, thermal cracking, granule loss, a whole slew of problems that you don't want to see.
Thanks for that, James. We've been talking a lot about asphalt, and I know that we have some other types of material as far as roof covering goes. One of the questions here is about tile roofing. In regards to tile roof, is a repair more favorable for just a damaged tile, or should you replace surrounding tiles as well in that case of a damaged tile shingle?
So tile roofing systems, considerably fewer and further between than asphalt composition shingles. Don't get to see too many of them, especially around my portion of the country here in Kentucky. But I have climbed on a few in my time, and have done some inspections. Have talked with some contractors, adjusters about it. As a matter of fact, repairs on tile roofs are, in my eyes, a little bit easier than repairing asphalt composition shingles. Depends on the color, of course, and the exact material, and whether matching is available and whatnot. But removing a damaged tile and then putting a new one back in its place is it's tricky. It takes a little bit of patience. Definitely takes some know-how, but it's a lot easier to perform that type of repair without causing damage to the rest of the main roofing material around the one that you're trying to repair. That's where things get really dicey with asphalt composition shingles, because of their ability to flex, and contractors bending them upward to take nails out and then put nails back in appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
There's tools out there designed to do this stuff, but obviously contractors don't usually want to go that route. They usually want to argue that doing a repair on the shingles is going to cause damage to the other shingles around it, and therefore you should buy the whole roof. Tile is a little bit different. It's not necessarily not so viable of an argument with tile as it is with asphalt composition shingles. So again, tricky, takes some patience, but I think repairs on tile.
Mhm.
That takes place a lot more than repairs on shingles, actually. As far as I should clarify, a percentage based average,
Gotcha.
right? Obviously, shingles comprise probably 80% of the roofs in
Hmm.
America, and tile is maybe 1, 2, 3%. I'm just
Gotcha.
speculating.
All right, we've got another question about back to asphalt shingles. Um, Sometimes we see on the adjusters saying that shingles having granules that look like they've been brushed off is kind of from wind damage. If that's the case, then how would you quantify that as wind damage? What are some of the things that would prove that the granules brushed off might be wind damage?
So, again, from our perspective, the ladder assist side of the
Hmm.
business, granule loss is not something I have ever indicated as wind damage. Now,
Okay.
granule loss that comes with agent deterioration, foot traffic, a lot of time is to blame for granule loss on a roofing system. Even from us, the inspector side of the business, which is why cougar paws are so important. Those
Mhm.
foam pads on the bottom of our shoes that help protect that roofing system while we're walking on it. But of course, not everybody maybe that's been on that roof has taken that precaution. So, foot traffic is usually a lot of the cause of it. Blistering obviously would remove some granules. Spot defects in the shingles themselves, straight out of the package. Any type of mechanical damage, a tool coming into contact during installation or during repairs or during seasonal maintenance or during hanging Christmas lights on the tree, things of that nature. Granule loss is not something I have, nor will I ever blame on wind.
Mhm.
Um, just doesn't really. The only time you're going to see granule loss from wind damage is when the shingle has either been removed or totally flipped over, creased, torn in half. Right, you'll see some granule loss from that. But as far as a shingle laying flat on the slope of a roofing system and having some amount of granule loss, that's normal agent deterioration. That's not something I would ever indicate as wind damage.
Gotcha. Well, it looks like I'm running out of some questions here in the chat, so we're getting close to wrapping up. But I do have a couple more kind of on standby. Um, so when you're looking for damage on a roof, in particular hail damage, what are some of the things that you see as like a strong indicator, as like the first thing in the list of indicating hail damage as opposed to something else?
It's kind of twofold.
Okay.
For me, it's going to be spatter marks,
Mhm.
right? The removal of oxidation from a surface, and then the collateral damage. Absolutely, those are the two most important indicators. When it comes to collateral damage, really looking at gutters, downspouts, obviously aluminum, soft metal flashings. Just had one yesterday, as a matter of fact, full copper everywhere,
Oh,
copper
wow.
gutters, down, flashing around the chimneys.
I'm sure the spatter marks
Copper
were
is even
great on that.
Copper is even softer than aluminum, more malleable. Had half dome rounded off dormers on this house, full copper all around them. Obviously, that's where I gravitated to first to try to look for
Mhm.
collateral evidence of hail damage on this property. If I'm not seeing collateral damage to substantiate, a hail event of damaging caliber,
Mhm.
really, that's what you're looking for. I have no doubt that they experienced hail at this property because I actually live nearby. I know absolutely 100% certainty we had hail activity. It's just a matter of was the hail of damaging caliber, and
Mhm.
in this case, it was not. If there's not collateral damage to substantiate it, your aluminum box vents, your rain caps, your flashings, copper, anything copper, gutters, downspouts, if I'm not seeing collateral damage, that pretty much tells me that the hail was not of the caliber to cause damage to those asphalt composition shingles. Box vents usually tell a really, really good story. Take our chalk, lightly rub some chalk on these box vents and see the impressions. Usually, to be honest with you, if you have to rub chalk on it to see it, it's pretty mild,
Mhm.
right? If it's moderate to heavy collateral damage or anything above moderate to heavy, you're almost always going to be able to see that damage with the naked eye. So if I can see that collateral damage with the naked eye, that's my first indicator. Satellites mounted on roofing systems, they're almost all, unless they're brand new, they're always going to be heavily oxidized. Transformer boxes out near the driveway at the end of the property. They're usually very heavily oxidized as well. Electrical meters on the side of a house, electrical breaker boxes on the sides of houses. These are all going to be heavily oxidized surfaces. Now, direction does come into play, very much so here in our neck of the woods. Almost all of our weather comes from the south, the west, southwest direction. So obviously, the side of the house on the northeast side, it may not have any spatter marks at all if the storm is directional and the wind's blowing. Always taking that into account, but I'm definitely looking for the removal of oxidation that looks consistent with hail. It's got to have just the right amount of uh, spontaneousness, right. I can see fingerprints. I know what fingerprints look like. I know what smudges look like. I know what birds doing this and that and looks like.
Hmm.
Right. Randomness, that's the word I was looking for. Hail is going to produce patterns of certain element of randomness, right, and when you see it, you'll recognize it immediately, and that'll lead you in the direction of assessing hail damage to shingles.
Well, James, thank you for answering that for me. Let's see. Got a few more questions in the chat, so I'll go ahead and pose those. How do you, related to hail damage, how do you, make a call on, or not really make a call, make an informed decision on calling something as hail damage when shingles might be old enough to have a great deal of granule loss, and so you lose out on the granules to kind of make that determination to advise that, that's the kind of proof you're seeing to indicate the hail damage there.
Right. That can be really dicey. That gets very difficult at times. I've seen it time and time again. 20-year-old three-tab shingles that are maybe approximately 15 to 20 years old, already in very bad condition, and claiming hail damage on the roof. Right. So it's not just any one thing that I'm looking at. Definitely have to take in, all pieces of information: spatter marks, direction, age of the roof, type of material, if three tab versus laminate versus metal versus tile, so on and so forth. At that point, I really, really have to rely on my training and
Mm-hmm.
my experience in the field, looking for that collateral evidence and looking for, spatter marks to indicate recent hail activity, right? Spatter marks may last, upwards of a year or so
Mm-hmm.
on surfaces, but obviously they're going to fade and diminish over time. I'm using that as a benchmark to kind of understand when the hail may have occurred. AC units, looking at the aluminum condensing fins, if they're present, those are really, really good indicators of collateral damage. It's just about the best indication of hail size.
Mm-hmm.
During a hail event. So if I can see that evidence and I can correlate this and that, this piece of information with that piece of information, I say, yeah, I definitely believe there's been recent hail activity. Then you finally get into looking at the shingles themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is looking at the shingles and actually trying to identify damage on the shingles themselves is all secondary to all these other thought processes and pieces of information that I have to collect on a property during an inspection. So this is all happening very, very fast in real time. When I finally get on the roof and start looking at the shingles, then I'm looking for actual hail impacts versus blistering versus mechanical damage
Mm-hmm.
versus just normal granule loss, agent deterioration. And it can be very difficult, especially on older roofing systems, very worn out. It can be very, very difficult to differentiate between what in fact is hail damage versus just normal agent deterioration.
What are some of when you're comparing, size? Sometimes, what does it look like when there's a difference in, denser hail and less dense hail? What are some of the indicators that you use to kind of see that, and what does the difference look like in the hail size and density and that damage?
Um, really, really, really hard to try to pinpoint that down
Mm-hmm.
after the fact, right? Now, I mean, if you were at the property, if it happened to occur on your property and you were able to collect some of those hailstones
Right.
and keep them in the freezer, right? That's another story. But an inspection after the fact, really, really hard to try to say, oh, this hailstone was extremely dense, like as
Mm-hmm.
dense as a golf ball. You really just got to get very up close and personal with the damage. I'm looking for concave impact marks on asphalt composition shingles. I'm looking for actual fracturing to the fiberglass base matting of a shingle. What we refer to in our industry as holy grail hail. Very, very hard to come by, and hard to find on a shingle. But if you happen to have some unsealed shingles on a roofing system and you were able to very slightly lift them up and take a photo from the underside and actually see daylight penetrating through a shingle, right, where there's actually been a fracture, that's what we would refer to as holy grail hail. That's kind of the pinnacle of hail damage,
Mhm.
right? I can see I've got the collateral evidence to back it up. I've got spatter marks indicating recent activity, and I've got a concave impression on the shingle. I was able to photograph it from the other side so that you could clearly see there has been a fracture to the base mat of that shingle. That's kind of top of the line pinnacle of documenting hail damage.
Well, James, thank you so much. It looks like I've run out of questions in the chat. So I guess we can wrap it up for the day. Thanks so much for joining us today to answer questions live, and then also a couple weeks ago to record this episode. The rest of the Knights team, I know y'all have so much information to share on roofing systems and shingles and hail, and so it was really great to have you guys on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. There's so much information to be shared out there. I know 15-20 minutes doesn't do it, but
Yeah.
we could ramble on for hours about this stuff. I'm about 7 years in now. Climbed probably 5,000 plus roofs. Still learning something new every day.
Mm-hmm. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us, and I guess we'll see you next time on April 13th at our next Claims Corner, so be sure to share registrations with everyone on that, and watch our announcements for the registration link and the link to join that, and we will see you next time on Claims Corner. Thanks, everyone.
I have been an adjuster since 2017. CNC was actually the first company that gave me a shot, and I've been thriving in the industry ever since. Everything with CNC has been amazing, from the level of support to communication with even your lowest ranked employee at CNC to some of upper management are willing to talk to you and help you out. Everyone's just trying to get the job done as a team.
I've worked with CNC since 2008 at Hurricane Ike. I've done, I believe, 7 or 8 hurricane deployments with them. My experience with CNC has been nothing short of amazing. Anytime CNC asks me if I'm available, I always say yes. They are my #1 choice anytime I'm going to be deploying for a major event. They are trustworthy. I love working with them.
When I got my call, I just said yes. It was that simple.
Yeah.
But also, I didn't really necessarily have anything else to consider. So, that's something else. That's a very big factor, what he just mentioned. If you have a fiance or if you have a child or anything like that, consider that before you hop into this, because it's not just, well, actually, for me, it's just, yes, I can go. But, maybe it might not be that easy for, somebody else who's trying to hop in.
I think customer service is probably the biggest aspect of being a desk adjuster, because I would say 90% of your time is spent on the phone or writing emails to policyholders, representatives, contractors, things like that. You have to know how to explain things, how to be personable, so that way you can get the information you need and kind of help them along through the process. But computer skills, customer service, being able to speak well over the phone, explain your thoughts, precisely. I think those are all great qualities to have.
Claim file is a timeline of events. It really is. It truly is. It's a book. It should read like a book, right? From the first phone call you make to the customer, you make initial contact, you document that. Then if you have to follow up with the contractor, You have to follow up with the agent. You have to call the housing vendor. Whoever. It should read step by step. You should be able to pick up the claim at any time and know what's next.